Avoidants are magnetically drawn to people who lack emotional awareness because emotional innocence provides them with the perfect environment to maintain control over relationship dynamics without being challenged or called out on their behavior. When someone doesn't understand attachment styles, relationship patterns, or emotional manipulation tactics, the avoidant can operate freely without having to explain or justify their inconsistent behavior. Your lack of emotional awareness means you're likely to interpret their mixed signals as complexity rather than dysfunction, their hot and cold behavior as passion rather than avoidance, and their emotional unavailability as mystery rather than immaturity. This misinterpretation allows them to continue their patterns without facing the uncomfortable reality of how their behavior affects others. The emotionally unaware person becomes the perfect canvas for the avoidant to project their preferred version of reality. They can convince you that their withdrawal is about needing space rather than about fear of intimacy. They can frame their inconsistency as spontaneity rather than inability to commit. They can present their emotional unavailability as depth rather than limitation. This dynamic is particularly intoxicating for avoidants because it allows them to feel sophisticated and complex while avoiding the vulnerability that comes with authentic emotional expression. They can maintain their self-image as mysterious and desirable while never having to confront the reality that their behavior is often hurtful and confusing to their partners. Your emotional naivety also protects them from having to face their own patterns. When someone doesn't recognize avoidant behavior for what it is, the avoidant doesn't have to acknowledge it either. They can continue operating from their defensive strategies without the discomfort of having their protective mechanisms exposed and named. The avoidant feeds off your confusion and attempts to understand their behavior because it confirms their power in the dynamic. Your struggle to decode their mixed messages validates their importance while keeping you in a state of emotional uncertainty that prevents you from making demands or setting boundaries they're not ready to respect. Your confusion validates their sense of importance and desirability. Nothing feeds an avoidant's ego more than someone who's completely captivated by trying to understand them. When you lack emotional awareness, you're likely to spend enormous amounts of mental and emotional energy trying to figure out what their behavior means, what they're thinking, and how to earn their consistent affection. This obsessive focus on decoding them makes them feel extraordinarily important and desired. Your confusion becomes proof of their impact on your life. The fact that you're spending so much time analyzing their words, actions, and motivations confirms that they matter deeply to you. This validation is addictive for avoidants because it provides them with the ego boost of being intensely important to someone without requiring them to reciprocate that level of investment. The avoidant interprets your confusion as evidence of their irresistible allure. They believe that your inability to figure them out proves they're complex, fascinating, and worth the mental effort you're expending. They mistake your emotional confusion for romantic intrigue, not realizing that healthy relationships don't require detective work to understand basic intentions and feelings. Your lack of emotional awareness also means you're likely to tolerate behavior that more emotionally sophisticated people would immediately recognize as unacceptable. You might interpret their breadcrumbing as romantic tension, their emotional unavailability as playing hard to get, and their mixed signals as passionate complexity rather than simple inconsistency. This tolerance for poor treatment while maintaining fascination with their behavior is incredibly appealing to avoidants because it allows them to have their cake and eat it too. They can enjoy the benefits of your intense interest and emotional investment without having to provide the consistency, clarity, and emotional availability that healthy relationships require. The avoidant becomes addicted to the power dynamic where they're the mysterious puzzle and you're the devoted solver. This dynamic makes them feel special and desirable, while keeping them safely protected from the vulnerability that would be required in a more emotionally aware relationship. Emotional ignorance allows them to avoid accountability for their impact. One of the most appealing aspects of dating someone with low emotional awareness is that avoidants can engage in hurtful or confusing behavior without being held accountable for the impact of their actions. When you don't understand attachment styles or healthy relationship dynamics, you're likely to blame yourself for their inconsistency rather than recognizing their behavior as problematic. Your emotional ignorance means you might think you're too needy when they withdraw, too demanding when you ask for clarity, or too sensitive when their mixed signals hurt your feelings. This self-blame is perfect for avoidance because it absolves them of responsibility for creating emotional chaos in your life while making you work harder to be acceptable to them. The avoidant can engage in behaviors that would be immediately recognized as red flags by someone with more emotional awareness: breadcrumbing, future faking, hot and cold treatment, emotional withholding, without having to explain or justify these patterns. Your lack of awareness means you're unlikely to name these behaviors or set boundaries around them. This absence of accountability allows the avoidant to continue their patterns without having to confront how their behavior affects others. They don't have to sit with the discomfort of knowing they're causing confusion, pain, or insecurity, because you're not equipped to articulate the impact of their actions in ways they can't dismiss or rationalize away. Your emotional ignorance also means you're unlikely to enforce consequences for poor treatment. Someone with higher emotional awareness might create distance when faced with inconsistent behavior, but your confusion often translates into increased effort to understand and accommodate rather than decreased tolerance for unacceptable treatment. The avoidant finds this lack of accountability intoxicating because it allows them to maintain their defensive patterns without having to face the reality of how those patterns affect the people they claim to care about. They can continue operating from fear and protection while avoiding the growth that would come from having their behavior consistently challenged. They feel safe with your inability to see through their defenses. Avoidants are deeply attracted to emotional ignorance because it means their carefully constructed defenses remain invisible and unchallenged. When you lack emotional awareness, you're unlikely to recognize their behavior as defensive strategies designed to maintain distance and control, rather than authentic expressions of their personality or feelings. Your inability to see through their defenses means they can maintain their protective walls without having to explain or justify them. They can withdraw when things get too intimate without you recognizing it as a fear response. They can create distance through mixed signals without you identifying it as a pattern of avoidance rather than genuine uncertainty about their feelings. This invisibility of their defensive strategies is crucial for avoidance because having their patterns recognized and named feels incredibly threatening. When someone can see through their defenses to the fear and vulnerability underneath, it strips away their sense of control and safety. Your emotional ignorance preserves their ability to feel protected while still maintaining connection. The avoidant also feels safe knowing that your lack of awareness means you won't try to heal or fix their attachment wounds. Someone with higher emotional intelligence might recognize their patterns and attempt to create enough safety for them to lower their defenses. But your ignorance means you're unlikely to identify what needs healing, which protects them from the vulnerability that growth would require. Your emotional naivety also means you're unlikely to trigger their shame about their attachment style. You won't recognize their behavior as avoidant patterns, won't suggest they might benefit from therapy, and won't challenge them to examine how their past affects their present relationships. This absence of pressure to grow or change feels safe and comfortable to them. The avoidant can maintain their identity as someone who's naturally independent rather than someone who's defending against intimacy. Your inability to see through their defenses allows them to avoid confronting the reality that their emotional distance might be a trauma response rather than a personality trait. Your emotional immaturity mirrors their own and feels familiar. Perhaps most significantly, avoidants are attracted to emotional ignorance because it mirrors their own emotional immaturity and creates a dynamic that feels familiar and comfortable. When both people in a relationship lack emotional sophistication, neither person has to stretch beyond their comfort zone or confront their limitations. Your emotional immaturity means you're likely to respond to relationship challenges in ways that feel familiar to the avoidant, through confusion rather than communication, through increased effort rather than boundary setting, through self-blame rather than accountability. These responses don't challenge them to grow or change in ways that feel threatening. The avoidant doesn't have to worry about being the less emotionally developed person in the relationship when you also lack awareness about healthy relationship dynamics. They can maintain their sense of being the more sophisticated or mysterious partner without having to actually develop greater emotional intelligence or communication skills. This dynamic also allows both people to avoid the hard work of building genuine intimacy. When neither person understands what healthy emotional connection looks like, both can remain surface level while convincing themselves they're having a deep, meaningful relationship. The avoidant can maintain their protective distance while you mistake drama for passion. Your emotional ignorance means you're unlikely to model healthier ways of handling conflict, expressing needs, or creating intimacy. The avoidant doesn't have to confront what they might be missing by maintaining their defensive patterns, because you're not demonstrating more emotionally mature alternatives. Why this dynamic ultimately fails both people. While avoidants may be initially attracted to emotional ignorance, this dynamic ultimately serves neither person's genuine needs for growth, healing, and authentic connection. The relationship becomes a mutual avoidance of emotional development, disguised as romantic intensity. For the avoidant, dating someone with low emotional awareness enables their patterns rather than challenging them to grow. They remain stuck in defensive strategies that prevent them from experiencing the intimacy they secretly crave. They never learn what it feels like to be truly known and accepted because their partner can't see, through their defenses, to love their authentic self. For the emotionally unaware person, this dynamic creates confusion, insecurity, and a distorted understanding of what healthy love looks like. They learn to accept inconsistency as normal, to work harder when they should be setting boundaries, and to blame themselves for relationship problems that stem from their partner's emotional limitations. The initial attraction based on emotional ignorance eventually becomes the relationship's downfall, because neither person is equipped to create the safety, understanding, and growth that sustainable love requires. The avoidant remains defended while their partner remains confused, and both miss out on the possibility of genuine intimacy and mutual healing. Understanding this dynamic is crucial because it reveals why developing emotional awareness is so important, not just for your own well-being, but for your ability to attract and maintain relationships with emotionally mature partners who can offer genuine intimacy rather than just the illusion of depth.